Word of the plantation owner's demise raced through the heavy, stifling heat of the southern city, setting tongues wagging by midday. The master of Bellamir was no more. In his wake, he left an emptiness that dwarfed even his formidable presence. Stacks of wealth cultivated through vast cotton fields, the forced labor of countless enslaved people, and the hush of unspoken suffering remained as his legacy. The late man had stood as a titan of affluence and indulgence, rarely sullying his skin, while fortune flooded in with every cotton crop. Now the man himself had vanished from this world, leaving only Margaret Bellamir, his widow. Margaret's name drifted from balcony to parlor, cloaked in both admiration and suspicion. She possessed a rare beauty and unshakable composure, now thrust into the heart of a dominion she had never fully commanded. At his funeral, she embodied bereavement, draped in mourning black, hands hidden by gloves, mouth quivering just so. Yet, beneath that veil of perfect sorrow, another force quietly awakened, calm, keen, and perhaps perilous. Those high-ranking Southern men watched Margaret with something more than polite condolence. Calculation flickered in their gazes. Here was a widow, both enticing and unimaginably rich. In circles where unions of power were wrapped in the thin veil of romance, a woman in her position rarely stayed single for long. Still, Margaret felt no urge to step back into captivity. Her husband's passing had delivered more than land and ledger entries. It had handed her something almost unimaginable for a woman of her era authority. She was no longer beholden to a spouse, nor tethered to the dictates of any male overseer. She could finally chart her own course. The possibility electrified and unnerved her. 7 days after the funeral rites, Margaret made her way out to the sprawling fields for the first time as leader, not visitor. The air pressed close, hot and pungent with tilled soil. Lines of overseers gathered to greet her, hats clutched in nervous hands, their eyes tracking her every movement, eager to discover what changes this new hand at the helm might bring. In rigid lines under the relentless sun, the enslaved stood, skin shining with perspiration, expressions masked in stoic calm. Margaret examined the rhythm of their work, the practiced hands gliding through cotton bolls, the weary bend of their backs, and the silent resilience that seemed to bind them together. Her late husband had called them assets, little more than tools in the machinery of his fortune. But in that instant, Margaret glimpsed something far deeper, a hidden force, a collective will. That vision clung to her through the sleepless hours that followed, playing over and over in her mind, not just the labor, but the quiet rebellion etched in their movements. It disturbed her, yet stirred an unspoken interest she could not define. At dawn, she swept out of the Bellamir house toward the city's bustling slave market. When questioned about her intention, she answered without hesitation. She sought house servants, young and strong. By day's end, 10 men bore the mark of her purchase. The overseers, ever watchful, assumed these new faces were simply destined for household chores. They could not have been further from the truth. Popular imagination often casts the Southern belle as gentle and pure, untouched by harshness or sin. Yet, historians like Catherine Clinton and Stephanie E. Jones Rogers have peeled back that comforting fiction. Their research reveals another reality, one where white women, especially those widowed and left at the helm of sprawling plantations, awoke to a newfound unsettling freedom. Without husbands to restrain them, they suddenly held sway over land, wealth, and, most chillingly, absolute control over the lives of those enslaved beneath their roof. Across the weeks that followed, Margaret's home buzzed with unspoken questions. The staff whispered about her odd routines, midnight walks through shadowed corridors, the way she insisted her newly acquired slaves live near the main house instead of being banished to distant quarters. Long past midnight, flickering candles shone behind her windows, and the hush of the estate would break with the measured thud of footsteps, doors easing closed in the darkness, cloaked in secrecy and tension. With each dawn, Margaret appeared composed, almost radiant, as if the secrets of the night had bestowed upon her some precious, long-denied gift. But what awakened her was hardly gentle affection. It was the rush of having unchallenged authority, the thrill of exercising power beyond reproach. Now she could summon any man, a person the law regarded as less than nothing, and he would be forced to answer her call. Yet beneath this authority brewed something far more complicated and perilous, a craving, a yearning that was not just physical, but touched the very soul, a desperate desire for a type of freedom and defiance that life had never permitted her. As each candlelit night slipped by, Margaret became enmeshed in the same system of subjugation that defined her world. Every private encounter she initiated was stained by a profound cruelty, the kind that comes from absolute imbalance. The men she beckoned had no choice but to comply. Disobedience could mean retribution, potentially fatal consequences. The vitality she saw in them only sharpened the edge of her control, underscoring just how firmly she now held the reins. Margaret blurred the lines between power and intimacy, mistaking her dominance for connection. The exhilaration of control became her way to outrun the aching solitude left by her husband's death. In the half-light of secrecy, yearning transformed into something almost monstrous, roiling beneath the surface. Still, dark secrets rarely stay buried for long. At first, it was just soft voices in the kitchen, sidelong glances passed among the overseers. Soon, neighbors started to note her frequent dismissals of staff and her solitary late-night visits to the slave quarters. Questions bloomed. What unfolded behind those stately columns after dusk settled over the plantation? Southern society depended on shadows and hush, but such silences splinter easily beneath the weight of wrongdoing. Margaret was hardly unique. Throughout the South, widows newly unshackled from marital restraint staggered along the same precarious path where the ache for company teetered dangerously close to the edge of forbidden longing. Elizabeth Fox-Genovese and other historians would eventually call this the paradox of the Southern mistress, a woman shaped by the restrictions of a patriarchal world, yet fully entangled in oppressing others. Margaret's journey was far from singular. It was simply one of the stories that dared to surface. In the sunlight, she projected the ideal Southern woman, gracious, cultured, benevolent. But when darkness cloaked the estate, a different side emerged. Shielded by thick curtains and bolted doors, she stepped far beyond every boundary her community held sacred, wielding her authority in ways that would have shocked and condemned her if ever exposed. These midnight acts felt to her both like emancipation and a torment. Each secret encounter was a silent act of defiance against her own cage, but also a fresh layer of guilt pressing in on her spirit. Staring at her own reflection, Margaret saw all the layers at war within her. The genteel widow's mask, the piercing stare of someone used to command, and the unmistakable shadow of wrongdoing. Locked within her own contradictions, she embodied both the ruler and the captive, holding power yet bound by forces she could neither escape nor name. Night after night, Margaret tried to seize her own sense of liberty by exerting control over another's fate. But each new dawn brought her back to the reality of a world steeped in cruelty, deception, and persistent silence. History would let her name fade into obscurity, just as it did with so many women who walked in her footsteps. The official records might note their riches, their stately homes, and the outward trappings of sorrow, but never the hidden truths that surged like an underground river through those plantations. Still, the echoes of such secrets endure, carried on the wind through fields of cotton and sugarcane, through spaces where unchecked desire and unchecked power once collided beneath a velvet sky. When women like Margaret assumed control of an estate, they also assumed custody of its legacy of hidden pain and unspoken stories. Living on those grounds meant inhaling the air of privilege laced with decay. It meant knowing that every immaculate surface concealed a deeper rot. For Southern widows, the freedom they tasted was anything but pure. It was tangled, messy, a freedom forever haunted by contradiction. She had slipped free from the rule of a husband, only to stumble upon a more ominous authority lurking within herself. The genteel South named it refinement, a mask of grace. History would eventually strip away that veil, revealing it as power stripped of compassion. Meanwhile, the rumor mills spun endlessly around her estate. Neighbors speculating about her unwavering solitude, gossip filling parlors like uneasy birds. Many wondered at her refusal to take another husband. Suitors with wealth and status arrived, offering security and companionship, promising to restore her to what society considered a woman's rightful place. Margaret dismissed them all with gentle finality, insisting her devotion remained with her departed spouse. Yet the truth pulsed quieter and deeper. She had no wish to be claimed by another man. She relished her own sovereignty now, reigning not merely over acres, but over every secret and soul within the boundaries of her land. Yet in that empire she reigned alone, feeling the strange knot of longing and shame winding tighter with each nightfall. In her chamber, the very air thickened with the unspoken consequences of her decisions, her guilt settling around her like unseen specters. She transformed solitude into authority and mourning into possession. The same mansion that had once boxed her in as a dutiful wife now served as a fortress for a different identity entirely. Gone was the husband who might have curbed her actions, gone the father or brother to set limits or pass judgment. Only those she commanded witnessed the world she built in secret. Years later, scholars such as Stephanie E. Jones, Rogers, and Catherine Clinton would sift through the shadows of this concealed order, uncovering how, after widowhood, white women seized control of plantations and blurred the boundaries between possessing and obsessing. Through discarded letters, dusty ledgers, whispered testimonies, they pieced together a reality too perilous to capture in plain language. These women were meant to embody chastity, to reinforce the myth of white womanly virtue so vital in the slave-holding South. Yet, behind curtains and locked doors, they indulged desires their society demanded they repress. For someone like Margaret, every forbidden night became a ceremonial act of command. She learned to haunt her own home like a spirit, gliding silently through shadowed corridors, her voice gentle but commanding. Those she'd beckon understood the silent pact: speak little, obey without hesitation. Inside those private quarters, an oppressive fear pressed down on everyone present, yet beyond those walls, Margaret never slipped from her carefully crafted image. She embodied the ideal Southern woman, organizing church socials, contributing to orphan charities, penning letters full of piety and sorrow. It was innocence worn like a costume, and Margaret wore it with practiced ease. But nightfall always unraveled that disguising layer. In the darkness, freed from the constraints of manners and ritual, she hunted for something she could never discover among Charleston's parlors or Savannah's polite society: a pure, unchallenged sense of authority. Each transgression pulled her further from the boundaries her peers had been raised to fear, and in those moments of defiance, Margaret found a strange solace. Yet the thrill always dissolved by dawn, leaving only emptiness. Every morning she faced her own reflection, uncertain if she held the reins of her longing, or if those desires had made her a captive in her own life. For the enslaved men, Margaret's nighttime summons were a waking torment, a stealthy violence without a proper name. They could not resist. Defiance meant certain punishment or even death. They carried the burden of her secret cravings with the same relentless resignation they gave to endless days in the fields. There was no escape, no comfort. What others might have named pleasure was, for them, simply another form of captivity. Forced to harbor her secrets, they lived in a silence so complete that history rarely acknowledged it. The plantation itself, full of twisting corridors and deep moonlit shadows, became a monument to everything unspoken. Servants learned to avoid even a glance. Overseers maintained an intentional blindness. The very machinery of this world operated to shield women like Margaret. Even white men, who sometimes suspected what played out behind closed doors, chose to avert their gaze. To truly see these breaches, to name them out loud, would be to confront an unbearable truth: that the supposed purity and honor draped around their society was nothing but a facade. In the warped hierarchy of the Old South, it was accepted, expected even, that white men could take what they wished from black women. Yet the thought of a white woman stepping across those same boundaries could never be voiced. It was an impossibility sustained by intentional silence. Among women of Margaret's class, there existed an uneasy pact, an alliance forged by mutual fear, hidden pride, and layers of hypocrisy. Other widows moved through life as she did, selecting young, able-bodied men to serve at their estates, cloaking their choices in the language of household duties. They too tasted authority masked as intimacy. At church socials and tea tables, their eyes would sometimes meet, a fleeting, meaningful glance signaling shared knowledge. No one dared to utter a word. Conversation itself became a risk. In silence, there was safety. In silence, survival. Time moved on, carrying Margaret through the decades. She grew older, her fortune undisturbed, her double life undisturbed. The land kept producing wealth, and the city's whispers never grew louder than the thick walls of her home. No one on the outside ever truly uncovered her secrets. With age, the edges of her beauty dulled, but her command of the estate sharpened into something almost icy. Among the people who worked her land, Margaret became a legend, a woman as much to be respected as to be feared. Whispered tales swirled through the quarters, claiming her heart hardened long ago, that she still lay each night in the very bed where her husband breathed his last, hemmed in by the ghosts of her own making. When emancipation finally arrived, the old structure collapsed. The proud Bellamir holdings withered, the enslaved gained their freedom, overseers abandoned their posts, and the former splendor of the mansion faded into ruin. Margaret stayed behind, her wealth slipping away, her deepest secrets decaying in the darkness beneath warped floorboards. The men whose forced obedience once fed her sense of power were gone, scattered by liberty, leaving her trapped with the haunting weight of her actions. The silence that had once shielded her now became her prison. Stories of women like Margaret rarely appear in the history books. Their legacies were smothered beneath layers of decorum and the heavy shadow of shame. Society made a choice to bury the reality that within the vicious machinery of slavery, white women played more than passive roles. They were agents of cruelty as much as beneficiaries, their complicity etched not just in the relentless labor they commanded, but in darker acts that could never be spoken aloud. Over time, the memory of the plantation mistress was cleverly edited, reshaped to fit a tale of blamelessness. Yet, beneath the polished histories recorded by the powerful, the real story slipped through the cracks, murmured by those whose lives bore the scars. Margaret's life was never fully captured in property ledgers or respectable family archives. Her truth clung to the corners of memory, in quiet exchanges between those who had known her rule, in the uneasy silence that followed her name. In the end, she slipped away as she had lived, wrapped in silence, her riches powerless to bring solace. When the estate changed hands, the doors closed on her secrets for the last time, and not a soul spoke of all that had been hidden away within those walls. The house was given new paint, its damaged walls restored, its history concealed by layers of both literal and figurative whitewash. Yet, no matter how diligently people try to erase the past, memory often lingers in the shadows. Underneath the nostalgic gloss of the antebellum South rests the reality of its women. These were women who ruled from the margins, who turned longing into a weapon, who confronted their own limitations through the suffering of others. Their reign was forged not only in forced servitude, but in relentless secrecy, where the lines dividing love, power, and cruelty became indistinguishable. Ultimately, Margaret Bellamir's tale is not just a solitary tragedy. It echoes the downfall of an entire world, a world that draped its deepest wrongs in frills and called them virtues, that taught its daughters to mourn for all to see and to transgress where no one dared to look, founded on hushed profit and a moral code built on layers upon layers of deception. Centuries may separate us from those days, but the traces of that stifling silence still cling to the earth where cotton once reigned. It murmurs through abandoned fields and among the ruins of decaying mansions, telling tales that official histories have tried and failed to snuff out. The past never truly vanishes. It lives on in the cracked foundations of former estates, in the veins of descendants, in soil steeped with memory. The hidden corners of the South hold more than the bitter story of slavery. They speak of the corrupting reach of power, of desires deemed forbidden, of human longing warped by the thirst for control. Men felt the bite of chains, women the crush of expectation. In their rare acts of defiance, the consequences grew too shadowed for history to willingly remember. Margaret was only one among many, countless widows who ruled wordless realms with uncertain hands, their lives unwritten, their names unheard. They drifted through dimly lit corridors masked as mourners, their sins observed only by silent walls. Time scattered their truths, and the stories that survived dressed them in innocence they never truly wore. Yet the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. It lives on in overlooked archives, in the groundbreaking work of writers like Catherine Clinton and Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, and in memories too strong to disappear. The grand plantations have vanished, their grand halls faded to ruins, their fields now mere dust. Still, that eerie quiet endures, the same muteness that suffocated voices, keeping so many stories locked away. If you stand still and really listen to the wind curling to the south, you may hear a faint echo, the sorrow of those who never had a choice, and the irony of those who believed they were free, though they were trapped in their own way. If you think these long-buried stories should be known, help us revive them. Subscribe, like, and share. With every story retold, every voice reclaimed, we inch closer to the truth that dwelled behind the facade of the Old South. Because history is not just what is printed in textbooks, it is what was once smothered by silence,